How's it going this week, everybody? This week I'm going to be having Michael on the show, and he's got a whole lot of stories that are really, really interesting, and he even had a Jersey Devil signing that we'll get to right at the end. Very exciting, and I'm glad he came on to share his stories today. Also, just wanted to give a quick shout out to all the members who have been signing up. I really appreciate it. You guys really help keep things going around here. If you guys are interested in the membership, you can head over to challengetheunknown.com and get early access to episodes 2 weeks before they come out. And one last thing before we get started tonight is this episode is sponsored by Smoky Mountain Squatch Coffee Company. Nathan sent me over the Cowboy Blend to try, and I'm very impressed with the quality and flavor. As many of you know, I'm a huge coffee drinker, and just for my audience, there's a 10% discount code. If you follow the link in the description and use code CTU at checkout, you'll get a great discount and know that you're not only supporting the show, but you're also supporting Bigfoot research, as a portion of their profits go into researching the mysterious creature. Thanks for listening.
So I was about maybe 9 years old at this point. I've moved around so many places over the years. My dad, he's with the government, and he's worked as a civil engineer for the BIA and for the Army Corps engineers. So we've moved a lot, quite a bit. And so back, I guess. This was about when I was 9. There was a Kmart in Juneau, and near that Juneau, Alaska, which is the capital of Alaska. Near that Kmart, there is a trail that goes into the woods, and my dad has always fostered in us a sense of exploration, but also just general, trying to stay healthy and be active. So he would take us out on hikes in different places or trails in Juneau. And so we go down this trail that's near, not Kmart's no longer there, by the way. But we go down this trail, and as we're walking through it, we come to this strange clearing, and it's not a really well-known trail. Not many of the locals in Juneau know that it's there. And as far as I'm aware, I don't think it's even there anymore. It was quite overgrown. But as we're going through the trail, we come to a clearing, and it's almost like a perfectly circular clearing, and it's probably about a mile, not a mile. It's probably maybe 3,000 feet wide. That like half a mile thereabouts, and it's everything's dead. All the trees are black, and the ground is. Juneau has a very lush forest. I mean, it's an Arctic rainforest. So to see a patch of the woods where literally everything is dead, and there wasn't any birds or anything along of those lines, it was perfectly circular. Like you could stand in the middle, and it would be a equal amount of distance to any of the ends of this circle. And so when we ended up there, it seemed like it just felt different. And I remember telling my dad, I said, I feel like this place is otherworldly or ghostly, and he said I was just being funny because, I was always into, weird stories and stuff like that. But he said, I guess he started to get a little freaked out because we tried to leave the circle, and the grass was all dead. Any of the plant life on the ground was dead. It was dry and quite, it was like brown in a forest that everything was really lushly green, emerald green. And so as we tried to leave this circle in the woods, we ended up getting quite a good ways to the edge, and then the trail seemed to cut off. So we took a little bit towards another edge, and we went out that way. And we continued to hike for about 45 minutes into what we thought were the edge of the woods. And according to, I mean, At this point, we probably figured we were quite lost, and we checked the moss growing on the trees to check where north was, etc. So we were sure we were going in one direction, and yet somehow we kept ending up back at this area of just completely dead plant life. It was so bizarre, and it continued like this for about 4 hours of us trying to leave this circle and going off in different directions, trying different things, judging our direction by the moss on the trees and still ending up lost. And at this point, my dad was panicked, and I started to get, really kind of excited by the whole predicament that we were in. So I was laughing, and the instant I started laughing, we were able to leave the circle. And it turned out we were only about 5 minutes from the road the whole time.
Huh. That's weird.
And it was so weird. And, I try to see if that circle's there because all the trees were dead. So there's no things on the trees, like leaves or pine needles or anything like that. It was just all dead. So you could see up the sky. So I tried to look at this site from Google Maps recently, and I didn't see anything there. Like there was no clearing. But there's also no trail. There used to be a trail that you could see from satellite, and you can't see it anymore.
Yeah, man, it's really interesting. I know you've got your theories about that, and the second portion of the second similar encounter that you have is very intriguing to me. That we'll get to in a second here. But what do you think it was, man? Why do you think that this phenomena was happening? Why were you stuck?
Well, see, I didn't think too much of it. I thought we were just extremely disoriented when I was young, and I thought it was just a bizarre happening. But I guess when I got older, and I guess this was I was always raised in a Protestant household. So from about age birth to 17, I was raised pretty staunchly fundamentalist Protestant, and then I ended up graduating and I went to college, and, that changes everything. So I was like hardcore atheist until I was 23. And then from 23 to 27, I started to really get interested in other religions and spiritualities that don't hold the traditional view of the cosmos in the Christian sense, but one that might match up more with a scientific view of the cosmos in a way, and not staunchly scientific, but one that would not outright contradict many things in the scientific view of the universe. And so I started to look at these different spiritualities, and one thing led to another. I asked for some signs. I made some prayers, and I felt like I was contacted by a Gaelic goddess named Bridget, Brigid or Breed, many names. But so I started to work with the whole Celtic polytheist view of the reality or mythology and stuff like that. And there is something that's discussed in not just the Celtic folklore, but also in Germanic and in even Native American folklore regarding little people of the hills, and elves in Germanic folklore, and fairies in Celtic folklore. And one of the things that can happen is if you enter a space that is, occupied, some people think it's like a portal or something like that. Other people think it's just a distortion in space-time or something like that. Tons of different reasons for it, but they call it being pixie-led. And so you get stuck in this space, and there's a circular space clearing up in New Jersey called the Devil's Circle. And it has exactly the same lore. And I didn't find out about that till I was about 25. And I looked back and I was like, I saw a space like this in Juneau, Alaska. it was completely bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah, man, the stuff is really weird, in particular about, like, I guess the fairies, as we call it. I've never done an episode for fairies in particular. I've talked to a lot of people about it, but, a lot of people say that, like, when they're children, they have these memories of these little entities or whatever, and I don't really know what they are, and I've never had anybody come on the show to talk about them or talk about what they saw when they were kids, but it's really interesting to me that so many people have these accounts of, seeing these little fairies or whatever you want to call them. So,
well, they're not just little. That's the thing, is that they call them the fair folk, and they can there's some I guess pixies are generally viewed as little, but there's other types, and they're described in most of the folklore as almost like, you could consider beings from another dimension or the other world, as it's called in the Celtic in the Celtic polytheist belief. So, and in one author I know who writes quite a bit about the subject is an author named Morgan Daimler, and she has a blog, Living Liminally, and in that she does discuss quite a bit of Gaelic, but also in a wider sense, just very related happenings in general. So I would definitely, if you were interested in that, I'd give her a look.
Yeah, for sure, man. And so let's get to your second story, man. What happened there?
Okay, well, so kind of similar to the first, only with this, it was I was in Pennsylvania, and we lived in Cresco, which is a large, like, it's an area in the Poconos, but it's way deep into the woods. It's like where people go in to retire and never be heard from again. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's just surrounded by huge swaths of untouched game land. So I've always, I kept up that whole adventuring attitude from when I was young, and I'd go into the backyard, which was on about maybe 25 square miles of game land or so, and just trees and rivers and streams. It was beautiful. But there was one place that I had a similar experience to the one I had in Juneau, and it was along a hill near a boulder field, like kind of like broken rocks and such. And if you're familiar at all with the missing 411 cases,
yeah,
they always talk about the boulder fields, and that's usually where strange stuff happens, is where natural boulder fields appear in the woods. But also, there's a thing in Pennsylvania, and they have cairns, like pyramids of rocks.
Yeah.
And they believe that they were either made as like trail markers by the Native Americans or maybe by early settlers. But there's cairns all throughout the woods in the Poconos. And there's actually a few societies that are devoted to trying to preserve them, because when they build up there, they unfortunately destroy the cairns as well. But and there's large rocks and boulder fields, but they're right in lines or grids, so it looks like they were placed intentionally, quite a few of them. But this one didn't look intentional. This looked like a natural boulder field. And I go up the hill that's surrounded by these boulder fields just to, see, because I'd like to get lost in the woods and intentionally disorient myself. But this was different because I was on the top of the hill, on top of a precipice, looking down. And so I figured out which way to go home. But once I was up there, I would go down the hill, and I was sure I'm walking downhill the whole time. So you feel it on your calves, when you walk downstairs or anything like that. And it was very steep. So I'm walking down this hill, and suddenly I'm back at the top of the hill. And it happens for maybe an hour of just, uselessly trying to walk down this hill. and coming back to the top. And then I heard this sound, and there's records in the old fairy space of Ireland of hearing fairy music. And this was quite a ways away from any, roads or anything like that, or really populated roads, or any active building project because it's state game land. And it's about 2 hours into the woods that you find this place. And there was a sound, like it sounded like a pipe organ mixed with bells. And it would play on almost like a microtonality measure and rise in octaves and lower in octaves. And it didn't sound like something that was distant. It sounded like something that was right next to my ear. And it would be, and it's like I could almost see where the sound was coming from, but there wasn't anything there that would be making that sound. So it was extremely bizarre. And then as I stared, just completely mystified by this whole experience, I saw something that people describe as like a cloaking being, like predator,
Yeah.
And it's like you can see light bending around it, but you can't actually, see it because it's just like bent light. It's cloaking. I don't know how else to describe it, but it was so weird. And after a while, I guess it started getting dark and I was able to go home, but yeah, it was weird.
Yeah, man, the cloaking figure is something that I've heard of before, especially with the missing 411 stuff. I know that's been covered. I actually had somebody that was involved with a missing 411 case on my show. Oh God, that was such a long time ago. That was one of my favorite episodes I ever did. This gentleman, unfortunately, when him and his friend were, young teenagers, they were working on a Boy Scout badge, and his buddy basically went missing, and they never found him, and it's been like 30 years now. But, he just stepped outside of the light of the fire while they were talking to each other, and then like the disconnect button was hit, he was cut off mid-sentence, and they never found him, never heard from him again. So
yeah,
it's weird.
It's really bizarre. And, do you ever hear about the children who were found? During some of these cases, they were talking about things like being taken into subterranean lairs and asked to defecate on a piece of paper or stuff like that. These things are coming from, children who are like, describing these beings that are asking them to do that and stuff. And, I don't know what it is, but,
right. It's super weird.
It seems to be something. Sorry, go ahead.
It's just so weird, man. A lot of this stuff defies all explanation. Like, first of all, the accounts from the survivors of this stuff, they describe that kind of weird stuff. And then there's the kids that are also found. I remember there was one case where they needed climbing gear to get up to this kid, and I was like, how is this possible? Yeah.
Or people who've been gone for 2 hours, but their feet look worn, as though they've been walking for days.
Yeah. It's weird, man. So, what do you think the cloaking creature is, man? Let me ask you that, because I've never talked to anyone directly that's seen it. You're the first person I have talked to that's actually seen it. I've only heard the stories from like missing 411 and stuff like that. So what do you think this thing was?
Well, like I said, I'm heavily skeptic about these kinds of things. I try to pursue the most mundane explanations first. And if I can't rule those out, then I'm willing to consider the bizarre. But the fact that a lot of this stuff has been, related in the folklore of many different cultures throughout time, it seems like, it's definitely something that people have observed. It's not a recent observation by any means. So that leads me to think, if I was to assign some kind of mundane explanation, it would either be, maybe a gas that, light is reflecting around or whatever. And, that's causing ringing in the ears or something like that now, and causing disorientation, like some kind of chemical could cause all of these kind of things if it was to escape from the earth, you know?
Right.
But I don't know what chemical does that. So that's a possible idea. And now I'm saying swamp gas, and I feel bad about that.
Yeah, man, it's weird. It's such weird stuff, man. And I don't think all of it can be explained with natural causes, man. You know, I think there's something else out there. You know,
I like to be agnostic about it. I mean, I'm not going to say unless I know for sure what it is, that I know that it's one thing or the other, or that I'm willing to rule anything out.
Yeah.
Like, I take the neutral ground in this stuff at this point.
Yeah, 100%, man. And it's a fascinating encounter, man. You know, if I saw a cloaked thing going through the forest, I think I would freak out, and I don't know what I would do, man. You know, I always think about these things, you know, it's always a big question mark to me to what I would do if I had some of the experiences that people have told me, you know. Even with something as simple as like a Sasquatch, you know, if I came across, you know, that 9-foot tall creature, you know, I don't know what I would do, man. I feel like if I'm ever out in the woods, I'm gonna have my 45 on me, but you know, I feel like I would be really conflicted as to whether or not I would take a shot at something like that, or if I would run, or if I would freeze, you know. I just don't know, and I don't think I'll ever know unless I have an experience with something out of the ordinary.
I wouldn't take a shot at it if it's not threatening me, you know? I mean, just because it exists and it's weird, I don't think is worthy of the death penalty. So,
right.
But then, you know, you have the possibility of panic in there. And, you know, many people probably would take a shot at things that are, you know, a giant 10-foot tall, hairy ape creature in the woods.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that in particular topic is something that I often think about, is what I would do if I ever came across one of those things, you know. And it's just like there's the whole side of like, well, if you bag a body, then you have the scientific discovery of it, but it's like, are you really going to kill that thing if it wasn't threatening you? And I would also have conflictions about how human they look, and you know, I would really have to like make a decision before I went out there as to what I would do if I ever encountered one, because if I'm in the heat of the moment, I can't be making that decision then and there, you know. It's a tough topic.
I do have a theory about it that could make it even worse if you did shoot it, which is there's tales in the U.S. of giants in the hills, basically, you know, in heavily wooded areas. Some of the earliest settlers and even back to the Native Americans, again, they talk about, you know, these giants that live in, you know, the hills in you know, in New Mexico. And then you have the Sasquatch legends in British Columbia and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, you know, the thing that would explain a government cover-up and would explain, you know, literally much about the whole elusive nature of this creature is, you know, have you ever seen what happens to a domestic animal after a few generations of being feral? They get big.
Yeah.
And they get hairy. Well, they get more wild animal looking. What if it's just a feral person? Like went into the woods and just over many generations of, you know, natural selection to being made into large beings like that you see with the Sasquatch. What if it's just a man?
Well, that's the thing too, is, you know, when I hear hunters' accounts of them, they say they don't take a shot because they look too human. And, you know, it might be, and I've been saying this forever, my opinion on the topic is there's no way this thing is just a big gorilla, you know.
Yeah.
If it was a big gorilla, one would have wandered into your local Circle K parking lot at some point, you know, and everyone would have taken pictures of it. You know, there's way more intelligence behind these things than I think most people give them credit for. And if you've heard the Sierra sounds, it sounds like they're talking to each other, you know, with the samurai chatter and stuff. I'm like, that's not just a gorilla, man, you know.
No,
but
it's communication.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's a tough one. It's definitely a tough one. But let's move on to your third story, man. I know that This one's a little more interesting. So it's the skull story. So tell me what happened there.
Oh, okay. So this one I'm starting to, I feel like I'm starting to sound like I've had way too many supernatural experiences for one person having a single lifetime. But maybe it's just because I might view them as supernatural experiences and be open to that possibility. But again, this is something I didn't really think too much as too supernatural until I got older. But there was my family. We moved to Williamsburg, Virginia, from Alaska, and at that time, I moved from Fairbanks to Williamsburg, Virginia, and there's this neighborhood, and I won't mention it because I don't want to give them any undue, attention that would bring people to go walk around in the backyards of these people.
Right.
Um, but there's this swamp, like in the woods of this neighborhood. And first, I should say, when we first got into the neighborhood, it was the house that we were in just had a bad feeling about it, or just the whole neighborhood, really, just the whole street was weird. And not weird as in, run down or anything like that. It looked like a normal neighborhood, but it just had a dark feeling. And, I'm still adventurous, 16-year-old at that time. And I go off into the woods, and there's a swamp deep, deep into the woods. And there's gas rising from the swamp and dead animal bones everywhere. And I would have thought that it would be noxious gas and turn straight around if there wasn't for there being two swans dunking their head in the water and all that kind of stuff in the middle of the swamp, in the middle of the woods in Virginia.
Yeah.
And it was very strange. But I was like, edgy goth kid teenager. I saw a deer skull on the ground, and I was like, I'm going to take that home and put it on my dresser. So I did, and wouldn't do that now. But I took it home and, put it on my dresser, and I had this, the bad feelings in the house got even worse. But as I was taking it home from the swamp, the neighbors in that neighborhood were like watching me. They were all out on their front lawn watching me, like as if they knew I took the skull.
Whoa.
and so I put it in the house, and weird shit starts happening. Like a vase broke for no reason. No one was in the room, and a vase broke. And okay, whatever. It might have been structurally unsound, no problem. But the room I was staying in with the skull it was impossible to get it warm. And it was just, cold all the time. And then there was the neighbors started coming over, and they started bringing us like cookies and cakes and stuff. And they talked to my parents, and then my parents would want to introduce me. And I forgot. Well, when I went to go get the skull, I got a really bad case of poison ivy. Like I broke out, and there were like splotches and like welts all over my face. So my parents would, want to introduce me, and then they'd have to explain that, no, my son doesn't have some horrible disease. He just got into some poison ivy. And so the neighbors would be talking to my parents, and then one out of every group of neighbors, and there'd be like 4 families that came over during this time, one out of every group would turn to me and say, "Hey, so Michael, did you see the swans?"
Whoa.
And I'm like, yeah. And the first time I was like, yeah, that's cool. That's cool. The second time I was like, oh yeah. I was like, so I guess the neighborhood knows about it. And they're like, yeah, a lot of us knew about those swans being there. And then the third time and the fourth time, I'm like, maybe they're trying to tell me something. It was so bizarre. So after a while, stranger things started to happen around the house, like, just feelings. Like it wasn't even like, physical things. It was just like, just dread for no reason. Like I'd be playing a video game, feeling fine, then all of a sudden it feels like someone just died. And I'm like, oh. So I did something stupid, and I was still a Christian at the time, but I was like 16 and starting to get out of, what my parents' ideas of right and wrong was. And plus I was like fascinated by what was going on. So I got the skull and I got a candle. I had a seance in my room, and that was the first time doing anything occultic. And I had the TV on in the background. Actually, I had the TV off, but I had everything off, actually, because it was dark, and I lit a candle, and I did a seance, and the TV came on and was static. And the radio came on and was static. And I blew out the candle and pretty much stayed up the rest of the night, just, kind of with a blanket around myself in bed, because I was terrified of what just happened. So I resolved that night to go and take the skull and take it back to the swamp. And I come back to the swamp, and I've only told about 3 people this story. So, but I go back to the swamp, and the neighbors are watching me, and they don't see that I have a skull with me, but because I put it in like a black bag, and I'm walking over to the swamp, this like black duffel bag, and I'm just just walking down, and they're all staring at me as I'm going back. And I'm just like, I take the skull out of the bag and I place it in the swamp. And then it's weird, but I almost like, after I place it back where I found it on the edge of the swamp, I kind of black out. And when I come to, I'm in the middle of a peninsula that stretches into the swamp, and it's surrounded by water on all sides. But in the middle of that peninsula, there's a tree, and it's just growing out of the swamp. So that's the only thing giving that island structure. So I don't know how I got to that island. I don't know how I made it there. But as I go to walk back across the peninsula, what I think is solid ground gives way into mud, and I begin to sink. And I sink up to about my chest, and I quickly grab onto a nearby branch, and I use that to pull me out. And, now I'm really freaked out because I'm covered in mud and almost died in quicksand. And I'm walking back, and my clothes feel really heavy. And neighbors aren't watching me this time or anything like that. And I enter the house, and my parents are like, "What happened to you?" And I said, I fell into the mud. But yeah, that's the story.
Man, how I got started out in all of this kind of like UFO conspiracy aliens and all this kind of stuff is back when I was in grade school, and this is leading into something you said about during your story, is me and my good friend Trevor used to hang out like all the time. He'd spend the night, we'd secretly watch South Park because we weren't allowed to and stuff like that. But one of the things that we were really into was like, he was a huge tech nut, like audio and video production. And then we were both really into like the aliens and stuff, all the scary, spooky stuff. So we would go on like all the old forums back in like 2010, and look at like alien caught on camera in the forest, stuff from like, on old YouTube, like really just spooky stuff. And we'd stay up all night watching that stuff, or like UFO sighting caught on tape and stuff like that, like the fun stuff. And, I can't really judge you for doing a seance with this deer skull, because at first I was like, man, that sounds really stupid. But then I'm like, I wouldn't put it past me. I'd probably do some dumb fucking shit like that too, honestly, in my opinion. I would probably have done that if I was in the similar situation. But man, that's so weird.
16.
Yeah,
Like
exactly. Right. Yeah, so it's like, I probably would have done the same thing, done something weird like that, just for fun, and it's such a crazy story, man. Like the whole like kind of cultish like behavior from the neighbors is really weird. It makes you wonder what else is going on in those woods.
I intended to go back this year, and I left to go to Virginia in the beginning of March of this year. And unfortunately, I had to leave because they were canceling all the fights later that March, so I never got the chance to go back.
Oh, that's brutal, man. Maybe one day in the future you'll get that chance, man. And I'd say don't screw with any deer skulls, but man, that's
I
such a
agree.
wild story, man. I love that. That's really cool. What an experience, man, for sure. That's straight up like a cursed item there. That's freaky. And
Well, it's not just the skull. I think the whole swamp is a cursed item.
yeah.
That's the thing, because it looked like people were sinking bodies into that bog, man, and there are just bones around it, like of deer and a dog and stuff like that. Although I didn't see the dog's skull, I saw a dog like forearm,
Mm,
femur. No, not femur. That's like I don't remember. Anyway, yeah, it was crazy.
fascinating, man. That's so creepy. That swamp freaks me out. I'm picturing it in my head, and I just I'm getting some bad mojo off my projection of this swamp. It's like I probably wouldn't go in there willingly, but let's get to your final story, man.
Yes, sir.
Let's hit it, man. Like you're gonna be the first person I've ever had that's supposedly possibly seen this creature. So let's just hit it right off the tee, man. What'd you see?
Okay. I saw the Jersey Devil in 2016, or rather, what I thought at the time was the Jersey Devil. So I lived in. I moved from Cresco over to a more populous city that's about 45 minutes away, called East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. And I worked because I was just trying to get started in the IT field in Palmerton, Pennsylvania. And that's about an hour and 15 minutes difference, or commute. So I'd commute out for about an hour and 15 minutes and commute back. Well, I worked the late shift. So I'd end up getting out of work at, 10, sometimes 12 p.m. or 12 a.m., but 10 p.m. And one night I was heading home late because I was working overtime, and I think it was about 1 a.m. And I was driving down the road, and I'm driving, and there's this large stretch of land of farmland with nothing on either side of the road. And this is over by just southwest of Cressyville. And I don't feel bad sharing that location because it's a very populated street. It's a 209, and it goes throughout most of Pennsylvania. But yeah, so I see coming towards me like two red dots that look really far away, but they're like in the sky. And I slow down, and out of the night, the red dots keep getting closer, but then I just see what looks like two massive leathery wings, and they like swoop really close to my car windshield, and I'm like freaking out. So I slam on the brakes. I get out of the car, and I hear it was just a massive sound. It was like the wings were just huge. Like it was the sound of like, you ever, when you're making your bed, you fluff the sheets. That's what it sounded like, but
Yeah.
like with wings. But I couldn't see it going the opposite direction because I didn't have my car's headlamp. So I was a little shaken by that whole encounter, and I went home. And that's that.
Jersey Devil sighting, man. I don't know. I know you're the skeptic of the conversation here, man. But I'm gonna go out on a limb, man. I think that was the red eyes sells it for me. And the swooping of the wings, man. That swooping sound of it taking off that's classic Jersey Devil, man. I'm telling you, I've been trying for the longest time to find someone that's seen it. And you're the first, man. That's such a cool experience. I know it was short, and it was
really short. Like it was over in like 30 seconds, but my heart was pounding because I was like, I get to now be that guy who gets to be like at parties. Yeah, I saw the Jersey Devil. It's crazy.
Yeah, man. It's a cool story though.
The Jersey Devil.
You don't think so?
I don't. I actually, I posted this on Reddit, this story about 3 months ago to just, see, because I was thinking about it one night in bed when I couldn't sleep. So I made a post about it, and it got me interested as to what could be a very mundane explanation for this. And I was looking at bird species that were, common there. And turkey vultures are common in Pennsylvania, but they have white-tipped wings. So I probably would not mistake them as being, these black leathery wings that I saw that night. But what I did think is that it could have been the black vulture, Cordyceps tratus. It's the black buzzard or the carrion crow. And Lancaster County, that same year in 2016, had a huge boom of black vultures. And they do have a wingspan of up to 5.5 feet. And according to, now vultures usually are daytime creatures. They're not ever, usually known to be nocturnal. But in September 2011's issue of the Journal of Raptor Research, they observed turkey vultures in Pennsylvania feeding nocturnally at a landfill. And then they also noticed that black vultures would do the same thing during periods of drought. And when I had the sighting, there was a period of drought. So, and also the other thing that leads me to think it was a black vulture is if you shine a light in a vulture's eyes, specifically black vultures, I know, but I don't know about turkey vultures, but if you shine a light in their eyes, it looks red. And they have waxy wings. So I might have interpreted that as leathery, but I mean, I don't know. It could have been straight up Jersey Devil. I don't know. But that's the only mundane explanation I could think with all the bird species, because those are pretty much the biggest birds that you'd see there that will look like that at night. But that's the only explanation, I think, that would match that.
Yeah, man.
Anything mundane.
I don't know, man. I'm thinking Jersey Devil, man. I'm gonna go screw this logic, man. I love the Jersey Devil stuff, man. I'd far prefer the weird, freaky horse winged hooved creature flying through the air. I far prefer that. But honestly, man,
it was scary, man.
Yeah, for real, man. But we're right at the end of our time slot here, man. But I wanted to thank you for coming on, man. You had some great stories, man.